Merry Christmas to Johnny Depp because Amber Heard just settled her defamation case out of court because she's out of money and realized, I think, that at the end of the day, no one was believing her version of events. If you go through the statement, which we're going to be going through in this video, you're going to see her referring continually to my story, my version of events, my truth. This seems to be a person who is completely hung up on the fact that my story is true, but no one believes it. And the reality is that if there was ever any proof of the physical abuse that she supposedly suffered, then there would be some formal charges have brought against Mr. Depp. Like there would have been police charges, police statements. Um, there weren't. Like none of it was ever proven. What we did see was a very volatile, narcissistic insight into how some of the richest people in the world still deal with the same insecurities and problems that the rest of the world has to face, but they deal with it in a way that is amplified by their access to large amounts of money and drugs and alcohol and it was a fascinating case study for me, and I think for many people around the world, into seeing that there's always that old adage, money doesn't buy happiness, and for a lot of people, you know, I think that and you can hate me for mentioning this individual, but I think Mr. Tate has a very good comment on this, which is that does money buy happiness? And he said, not necessarily. Money just amplifies things. So if you're a happy, fun loving, family loving, adventurous person, then your money is just going to amplify that. If you have money, then you're still going to be a funny, caring, loving individual. You're just going to now be rich while also being that person. But if you're a sad, narcissistic, you know, upset person who has substance abuse issues, then your money's just going to amplify that. And when I heard him make that statement, I was like, that's actually a really good way of looking at the case between Heard and Depp because these are two people who have some deeply rooted personal problems, and money just sort of amplified those problems. So at the end of the day, regardless of whose side of the trial you came down on, um, we just were witness to a couple of really wealthy people who were living out this horrific nightmare in real time. Um, it's a very interesting case study. It was the first time in my life that I paid attention to anything in pop culture, just because it was like everywhere, like every social media channel, everything was out there in the public. And I think the most interesting thing to me was that through it all, and the court obviously saw this because they did rule, largely in favor of Johnny Depp. Yes, something one of his previous team members said also constituted as a little bit slanderous towards her. And so he, owed her $2 million versus her owing him 15 million or whatever it was in the judgment. This came down to a case of two people who said some really nasty things about each other and ultimately had a complete falling out that led to a bunch of just vitriol and hatred spewing out in the forms of verbal commentary against each other. But no physical or sexual abuse was ever proven, despite claims by Miss Heard that, oh, my truth, my story, my version of events is absolutely true. It doesn't matter that the legal system doesn't agree with me. It's true. I swear it's all true. Well, if it was true, then you would have provided that proof in court, and they would have ruled in your favor. Um, so we're gonna go through the statement here because it is somewhat amusing to me to watch and read through because it's an admission that I don't have the money to continue, which we all knew. Um, and also, it's this continual of, like dogged stubbornness that my story, my truth is true, and it doesn't matter what the court system says, and the court system has failed me. After a great deal of deliberation, I have made a very difficult decision to settle the defamation case brought against me by my ex husband. It is important to say that I never chose this. I sorry, I got to pause here for a minute. You can't say that you didn't choose this. You chose to write the op-ed in 2018 that led to this trial. You chose to go out there and air your laundry in a public space, and you chose to make accusations in a public manner. Because here's the thing, if there was actually abuse that had happened, again, you would have went to the police, you would have filed, you would have made a complaint, you would have made accusations, they would have looked into those accusations, and if they found those accusations to be true, legal action would have been taken against Mr. Depp. That never happened. There was never any proof of anything. Therefore, but you did choose this. You chose to write the op-ed, and now you're dealing with the consequences. I defended my truth, and in doing so, my life as I knew it was destroyed. Again, my truth. This is something she repeats multiple times. The vilification I have faced on social media is an amplified version of the ways in which women are re-victimized when they come forward. But were you actually victimized? Like, maybe you're just facing the reality that no one believes you. I mean, I will admit that social media is a horrific, horrific place. I deal with this all the time. I'm a public figure. I deal with public criticism all the time. Now, I am not a famous individual like these people are, so I can't speak to having to deal with the level of, you know, trolling that they deal with on a regular basis. But I have been submitted to people trolling me. I have been submitted to groups trying to cancel me because they don't like the way I talk about a subject or they don't like the way I critique something. When I was, running the game studio, constant trolls. It is what it is, but that's part of living your life in the public eye. You just have to deal with that. She says, I have made no admission. This is not an act of concession. There are no restrictions or gags with respect to my voice moving forward. Now, this part really interests me because traditionally, in any type of settlement environment, there's going to be concessions made on the side of the person who is settling because they're agreeing to drop the charges in exchange for something, and that has stipulations attached. Now, if you remember, right after the case was finished, Johnny Depp's team offered her a complete, they were like, let's just settle this out of court and we'll kind of like water under the bridge in exchange for you agreeing to just stop this ridiculous parade and just not appeal it. Just stop. Just stop. Let's both move our separate ways and move on with our lives. And she was adamant that no, I am the victim. I must be justified. I must receive he must be punished. I would just hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. This is exactly what this is. And so she refused that settlement. So who knows what the terms of this existing settlement, the new settlement, are actually. But usually the person who is accepting, who is bringing the settlement to the table, is doing so and has to accept stipulations, which usually revolve around the fact that they agree not to say X, Y, or Z, or they face the reality of being sued again or having to pay back the money or whatever the case may be. So I'm a little not sure what she means by there's no restrictions or gags with respect to my voice moving forward. That seems very interesting to me. If that's actually true, if it is true and she's being given a clean slate and Mr. Depp has made no demands of her in regards to her continuing to speak about things in the future, I would say that points to him being being a bigger man, and saying you can keep talking about whatever you want to talk about, just drop the appeal process, so that we could just move on about our lives, and you can be the grumpy old lady in the corner who says my version of events was true for the next 20 years if you want to, but just stop this appeal process because it's wasting everybody's time and it's wasting the court's time. So maybe that's the case. I don't know. She says, I make this decision having lost faith in the American legal system, where my unprotected testimony served as entertainment and social media fodder. And then she goes on to talk about how the UK judge ruled in my favor and therefore it was a better one. And here in the US, I've exhausted all my resources, um, and to a courtroom in which abundant direct evidence that corroborated my testimony was excluded and in which popularity and power mattered more than reason to due process. I'm gonna call bullshit on that because both parties agreed to the evidence that was going to be used in court before they actually went to court. You don't just get to go into court and throw stuff at the other side. It has to be agreed upon. So you can't claim that there were things that, oh, woe is me, not all the evidence was presented. No, you agreed upon the evidence that was allowed to be presented during the court proceedings. You don't get to cherry pick that. It's something that the legal parties, including you, agreed to. You can't then, after the case is over, say, well, I would have won if I was allowed to also provide these 15 things that we agreed we weren't going to use, but now I disagree and I think that I should use them because I think that those would have won me the case. That's not how the legal system works. You don't get to make that sort of claim. And the whole idea that my testimony was excluded and popularity and power mattered more. Are you kidding me? You had ruined his career. What popularity did Johnny Depp still have at that point? Because you had already tanked his movie career with your libelous and slanderous comments in the op-ed. And that's what this man was fighting for. He was fighting to get his reputation back, the reputation that you had ruined by making these claims. And so it's like I find it hard to believe that she would think that Mr. Depp, that Johnny Depp was this. He did have a lot more fame in Hollywood than her, and he had a lot more popularity, but that had also been tarnished, and that has nothing to do with the legal system. She said, I was exposed to a type of humiliation that I simply cannot relive. Even if my appeal is successful, the best outcome would be a retrial where a new jury would have to consider the evidence all over again. I simply cannot go through that for a third time. Um, I cannot afford to risk an impossible bill. Women shouldn't have to face abuse or bankruptcy for speaking her truth. Again, my version, my truth, my truth. You didn't provide any actual evidence. Your version of things doesn't matter if you can't corroborate, if you can't back it up. I will not be threatened, disheartened, or dissuaded by what happened for speaking the truth. No one can and no one will take that from me. My voice for me is the most valuable asset that I have. Again, my truth. Thanks, my legal team and survivors know that telling their story is the only way to find relief. Again, a survivor of what is the question I have here, which most people have, because there was no proof that there was any physical abuse. Like, what did you survive? You survived some nasty verbal battles? Okay. I mean, I think any couple that's been in a long term relationship has had days when they've said things to their other loved one that they regret and in the heat of the moment, and they then go back and hopefully, unless they end up getting divorced, but in any good relationship, you'll realize that, hey, I messed up. Let's have a talk about it. Let's apologize. Let's figure out what the issue was. Let's communicate like adults and solve the problem. Now, that's not always the case. Some people don't want to be adults. Some people want to be children, and they don't want to have a conversation. They don't want to communicate. They don't want to solve things. They just want to stomp off and have a temper tantrum, and that's unfortunate, and that's why divorces can happen sometimes. But this idea that somehow verbal altercations equate to violence or abuse is ridiculous. Um, there was, accusations made about physical violence. I don't think any of that was ever proven in a court of law, nor were there any actual criminal charges brought against Johnny Depp for physical abuse. She, on the other hand, admitted to physically hitting him, like literally hitting him and laying hands on him. And yeah, he I think that there was proof that he threw some wine bottles. She threw dishes and wine bottles. He threw things. She threw things. Not at the other party, but threw them in anger. And this is something that I think we've all done this at some point in our lives. You're washing dishes and you're really upset about something, and you're just like rah, and you just kind of throw things on the ground and stomp off, in a fit of anger. That's not abuse at all. That is just you're having a moment of outrage, and then you stomp off, and 20 minutes later, an hour later, whatever, it's over with. Um, that's not the same thing. Neither is verbal altercations. That does not equate to abuse. It can if it's constant beratement and stuff like that. But again, that wasn't shown to be the case. I think they just had a lot of arguments as she. I think the judge, and the evidence showed that there was an individual in this case who was constantly pushing the other party and provoking reactions. I think there was multiple times where Johnny Depp was like, "Can you just stop? Can you just stop? Just stop." And I don't know. Anyway, interesting thing. So, congratulations to Johnny Depp for winning again, because as we saw, the evidence was overwhelmingly in his favor. And I think it's great to see that he is getting his career back on track. He's getting his life back on track. I am and have always been Team Johnny Depp. Um, Not to speak lightly of women who suffer from abuse, but I think that there is a big difference between real abuse and imagined abuse. When there's actually cases of, people who suffer domestic violence, it's horrible, and there's definitely an issue there. I spent a lot of time in Mexico, and Mexico has a huge problem with violence against women. It is a major issue here. It's a in a lot of ways, it's like depending on where you live, different parts of the country, there's things where it's almost like you're living 100 years ago in the Western days with the way women are treated sometimes. Um, I don't think that's anything to joke about, but I think there's a big difference between um, people who actually suffer from horrific domestic abuse and people who just have arguments. And in this case, I think we always saw was just some nasty arguments that happened. So it is what it is. Team Johnny Depp, I'm glad to see this has now come to a complete close, and I can't wait to see him in another Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Jerry Brockheimer said something the other day that they're having conversations and maybe something will happen. You never know. It would be really cool to see him come back. But at least he's doing movies again. He's getting his career back on track. He's getting his life back now. And that is a great thing because when you go out and slander someone, um, there are consequences from that. She made a statement here about, oh, my free speech has been violated. No, it hasn't. No free. You were free to make any declarations that you wanted to. You were free to write the op-ed. But in a free speech society, the other party also has the right to say what you just said was slanderous, or what you wrote, spoke slanderous, libelous, whatever. You're harming me and harming my reputation. I have the legal right to defend myself if what you're saying is untrue and is ruining my life and costing me my career and goodwill and all this other stuff. So you're absolutely you did not your free speech rights were not violated, Miss Depp. It's just that you were called out and people found your testimony to be lacking. So, congratulations, Johnny Depp. Merry Christmas from me to you. Like, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Don't forget to support if you can. Memberships, super chat, super stickers, Patreon page. See everybody in the next video. Stay safe out there. Happy holidays, everyone.